kind of got together, Kat Massin and myself, who are co-hosting tonight, started it, and I think Kat's going to put a link in for the network onto the chat. If people want to join and you're interested in it, it's for anyone who's interested in eco-museums or a community group who might be thinking about starting one, or if you've got questions or anything at all, you're welcome to join us. And today, this is our first evening. So we've, over the last few years, we've done a couple of sort of day network workshops, conferences online. And this is our first sort of evening kind of talk. So it's a new thing. It's just to try and get people talking and interacting and things. And we thought we'd take the opportunity of Scotland's newest eco-museum popping up to do that. So with that, I'd like to welcome Catherine Mills, who we're excited to invite along tonight, who's going to give us an introduction to this newest eco-museum, the Ecomuseum of Scottish Mining Landscapes. Just before I introduce Catherine properly, I want to let you all know that we're going to record the presentation tonight, and then that will be posted via the Ecomuseum network pages, which, as they, Kat will have put a link in the chat there, so you'll be able to get it there if you want to rewatch it at some point. The presentation will be recorded, but the time for questions afterwards won't be recorded, so people are free to speak without worrying about anything at all. And there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So as you listen to the presentation, make a note of any questions you have or put them into the chat, and there'll be time afterwards. So with that, I'd like to introduce Catherine. So Catherine is a senior lecturer in environmental history at the University of Stirling. She has a background in historical management and control of unhealthy environments, with an emphasis on both the urban atmosphere and the underground workplace in the 19th and 20th century Britain. More recently, the emphasis of her research has shifted towards post-industrial landscapes and the cultural and social value of these marginal and edgeland spaces, with a particular emphasis on formerly colliery sites. Catherine is a passionate advocate of both public engagement and interdisciplinary study, and her work is strongly community-facing and combines traditional archival material with geoarchaeology, ecological and environmental investigation, and ethnographic and sociological approaches. She was the creator of the original Landscape Legacies coal app, a series of walking routes that were told the local story of coal mining through the medium of the landscape. And it's directly from that this new project, in which she is the project lead, the Ecomuseum Scottish Mining Landscapes, has grown out of. So I shall now hand over to Catherine to do her talk.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. Now, you'll be aware from my biography that I'm an environmental historian. I'm not a museums or a heritage scholar. And I quite literally stumbled into this project, and much of its shape and design was serendipity and curiosity. So what I'm going to do this evening, rather than present an argument or discuss a theory, I'm simply going to tell that story. And there are lots of points that will perhaps prompt questions and raise points for discussion, and maybe offer insights and inspiration if you're kind of planning a similar project. Now, initially, I was just going to assume that everybody will know what an eco-museum is, but then I thought, maybe not. So just in case, this is our working definition. So it's without walls, shelving, cabinets, and expert curation. And the eco prefix refers to ecology. Essentially, we're exploring the relationship between living beings and their environment. They're web-based entities built around sites to visit that are important to the communities that live within an identified territory. So they have walking, cycling and touring routes that essentially, I suppose, celebrate a sense of place through the lens of the local populations. They're owned, shaped and determined from the bottom up. And I suppose, essentially just function as a facilitator come editor. And when I announced lottery funding for the project back in February, it caused quite a bit of confusion. You know, everyone was asking, where will the building be located? But it also raised a little bit of hostility and misunderstanding around that eco prefix. You cannot re-green coal. And I'm going to briefly come back to that antipathy a bit later on. But if nothing else, the project is fostering a greater understanding of what eco-museums are all about. So that's kind of our working definition. Now, the origins of the project began back in 2017, and a colleague and myself were approached by the Matt Robert Arts Centre on campus here at Stirling. And we were asked if we would like to support a community heritage initiative that they had planned for the autumn that year. And this was based around coal and the miners' strike. And it included contemporary dance and an exhibition. We said yes. And we were given a very broad brief. That was to provide their programme of events, which is up on the screen, with some longevity beyond their initial programme, and to engage the local communities in the two former pit villages of Socky and Ferlin, which is essentially north and south of the River Forth, one in Clackmannanshire and one in Stirlingshire. We had to engage them in some way. Essentially, they wanted us to mirror their chosen locations for their workshops and film screenings, which were also part of their programme. So we decided our contribution could be 2 guided landscape history walks based around the coal industry. But how to deliver it? We mulled over hard copy leaflets and interpretation boards. And whilst they might kind of, in terms of our brief, tick the legacy box, there was the question of vandalism, the constant need to update the print run. And the bottom line was, we didn't really engage the community. So cutting a very long story short, we revised the idea of guided walks. And we actually asked the 2 communities themselves if they would like to tell the story of coal through the landscape features that were important to them, from the extant buildings to the barely visible, the humps, the bumps, the hollows, the broken fences, the patches of scrubby vegetation, interspersed with hard standing building rubble and that vibrant orange of acidic mine water. And the 2 routes would be available digitally. And so the Landscape Legacies of Coal app that was free to download to a mobile phone was born. Very sadly, my colleague died suddenly and he never actually saw the project come to fruition, and it did stall for a while. But after an initial slow start, once the app went live, once there was actually something tangible to see, what was meant to be 2 self-contained walks just snowballed. So communities started to come forward with ideas for additional walks and cycling routes, because initially we were just walking. They also expanded my initial focus on coal into the associated industries such as brick making, lime burning, the infrastructure, particularly railways, leisure, the social environment. Songs and poetry were written for the routes. And the app and the former mining landscape started to become the focus for community art projects. And you can kind of see where this is going. The community definitely took ownership. They shaped its content and they drove it forward. And I suppose I didn't recognise it at the time. The Coal Legacies project was kind of evolving naturally into an eco-museum. But it was an off-the-cuff remark by a student who was working with a community group to create a route for her master's dissertation that kind of prompted me to explore it a bit further, because she used to refer to her project as the little eco, and I had no idea what she was on about. And that's kind of where it started. Then when Apple and Google withdrew their support for the generic template that the app was designed to back in late 2022 and was no longer available to download, at the time we had 26 walking and cycling routes. So if combined, they amounted to around about 180 miles, which is longer than the West Highland Way. They contained around 1,000 points of interest, illustrated with historic photographs. Have I got interference on my sound?
There was a little bit, I'm not quite sure where it's coming from.
No. Yeah. So anyway, around 1,000 points of interest, illustrated with historic maps, photographs, community artworks, audio recorded memories, the song and the poetry, And it had a combined approximate word count of around about 200,000 words. On its death, it had been downloaded around about 5,000 times across the world. It became very popular during COVID, used for reminiscence, and you could walk the route and experience the landscape from your armchair. It featured in the travel section of The Guardian, across the Scottish National Press, and we expanded a little bit, mainly as favours for heritage groups south of the border. So it just kind of, it literally grew arms and legs. But I always knew that the app had a fairly short lifespan of around 5 to 6 years. As well as withdrawing support, every time Apple and Android update their software, the app has to be updated to be compatible. And an app will only take so much tweaking before it needs redevelopment, which basically means starting again with the full cost. That was a very steep learning curve for me. I had no idea of all the kind of hidden extras behind an app. So it was never going to be sustainable. But then that project was only meant to be 2 walks. And I thought that after 5 years, people will have had enough. But I got that totally wrong. And I got curious about why and how the Cole app captured the public imagination. So along with a sociology colleague, we undertook a small research project that explored the social and cultural value of former mining landscapes. We followed that up with a second study, which is just in the writing up stage, exploring insider and outsider experiences and understandings of former pit villages. And these studies were again fortuitous, because when I started exploring a future for the Cole app, they help shape and support the new project's aims and objectives. Because in the beginning, we'd been given that original brief by Matt Robert, and the Cole app had evolved naturally. So I'd never, ever had to think about what I was doing and why I was doing it. So the research demonstrated the significance of these landscapes. And again, it was quite a surprise. They were much more complex and nuanced than I had anticipated. The research also revealed several interrelated threats. So redevelopment, this is linked into, there has never been a comprehensive record of these local sites. Their history's not been told from closure to present day. The only thing really known about them is the history of the pit, closure, and then it's almost like it ends. There's also the changing demography amongst mining communities and the potential loss of knowledge and memory. So they were the threats. And then there were the troubling negative perceptions around deindustrialization and also increasing guilt and shame in the nation's consciousness around the use of fossil fuels. And this is kind of where it intersects the hostility touched upon in the opening section. The voices of former colliery communities, like their landscapes, were kind of quietly fading into the background and falling silent. I might even kind of nuance that and say they're being silenced. The Cole app also allowed me to capture feedback and analytics, which was really quite useful. We got a good gender balance amongst the app users, so pretty much 50-50 split male, female. We did not engage the 18 to 25-year-olds particularly well, though. Coal for them is a dirty word. And neither were we reaching people who were not connected to the industry by location, occupation, and family. So I was going to perhaps need wider content coverage if I was going to go forward, as well as expanding our geographical focus. I mean, this was less troubling, but it was quite narrow. So much of the original walks were located in Stirling and Clackmannanshire, so close to the university. But perhaps the most urgent of all was the impending loss of that significant community created database. the coal app needed a new home. Those 200,000 words, if we hadn't have managed to scrape the data and get it transferred to a new platform, would have simply just been lost. All that work that the local communities had put in just had no home. So from all of this, I created a rationale for funding and a set of broad project aims. And these formed the blueprint for the National Lottery application and the backbone of the new Ecomuseum. So they're very much kind of based on the research and from the analytics. So to the creation of the new Ecomuseum. Firstly, I had to define our geographical territory. So I went, as is defined quite nicely, so the Midland Coal Basin. I hate to tell you this, the fire alarm's going. 2 ticks.
Oh, there you go. That's live TV, folks. Has it stopped?
Sorry about that. It stopped.
Great.
I knew something would happen. So first I had to define our geographical territory, very easy for us, the Midland Coal Basin. And that reaches through from Fife through to Ayrshire, essentially across the central belt. It's the most industrialised, or was the most industrialised and the most populated. We identified 5 focus areas for expansion in terms of routes or landscape journeys, as we've taken to calling them. 3 in each of our target locations, so 15 in all. And we are now including wheelchair accessible routes and rock trails for the over 5s. So our target areas were largely determined by the lottery. I would have preferred for the Ecomuseum to have evolved naturally, people just coming forward. But in terms of risk, they were happier if I could identify particular communities or particular areas. It's worked, so it's not been too much of a problem. And then I looked at content. So as well as the original features on the coal app routes, we've added in an additional emphasis on the black to green energy transitions and the potential of the former colliery sites for geothermal, wind and solar power, and also the afforestation of the Bings in terms of carbon capture. For those of you who are south of the border, Bing is the Scottish term for slag heap, tip, waste heap. It was a word that I had to quickly learn when I arrived in Scotland. So the idea about the black to green is to tell the story of coal into the future, which has much more of appeal to the younger generation. And then using art, ecology and geology to act as a bridge between the mining and the non-mining audiences, both in terms of including them as additional points of interest on the new landscape journeys, but also in the delivery of our walks and art workshops. Our art workshops are primarily cyanotype printing and hopefully a little bit, although we haven't done it so far, pebble painting, again, across our 5 target areas. And on the slide is a flyer from our first event held back in May. The materials from the workshops will eventually be brought together to form a single piece linking the 5 areas together, and it will be exhibited in the university's art gallery at the end of the funding period, so March 2025. And the website is supported for 10 years. So although we have our project periods, we have further 9 years where the website will be supported. And we have contingency in terms of staffing for that as well. And so to do this, I teamed up with the National Mining Museum of Scotland. Now, I already had close connections with the museum. I sit on the board of trustees and on the board of the Collections Trust. Now, they were informally involved in the original COLAP project, but now it's a much more formal arrangement. And it's very much kind of mutually beneficial because they wanted to extend their reach and challenge the widespread misconception that they only represent Midlothian, where they are based, rather than the entire Scottish nation. And so we can help facilitate that. We teamed up with the Museum Friends. They offer access to both expertise in terms of volunteering, and they have an established network of contacts, particularly in Midlothian. And like the museum, they're also looking to expand the geographical location of their membership. So again, they can use the platform of the Ecomuseum to do that. We have Matt Harding from the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland. And again, it's a win-win situation. This is all about serendipity. 2024 is their year of urban ecology, so it just dovetailed really, really well. And then we have the wonderful Katie Strang, representing Scottish Geology Trust, where she's their public engagement officer, but also the curator of rocks and minerals at the Huntarian. And our community artist, Yvonne Wayhan-Lyle, from YHL Studios. We've worked with Yvonne quite a few times before. And we also have a project coordinator in post, Aileen McFarlane, funded by the lottery. Aileen, I know you're out there somewhere in the audience. Aileen has an interesting background, so I suppose law, sales and heritage. So absolutely superb for this. And then not forgetting Jamie from the Digital Humanities Institute at Sheffield. He's kind of hidden away in the background, but he's kind of making the digital side of things happen. And I think we're probably, Aileen and myself, driving him slowly crazy. There's also a small team of university student volunteers working on the project. And again, this is to try and help bridge the intergenerational gap. We are hoping that communities, when they see youngsters working on the project, they might like to get involved. And unlike the CoLab, the students largely work behind the scenes. They were basically uploading routes, checking points of interest, that kind of thing, and mapping. This time they are front and centre. We're 6 months in. We actually launched the project at the end of April, again at the National Mining Museum. Our website is far from finished, but it is up and running and publicly accessible. And I think we're going to leave the URL. I'll leave it up on the final slide, but I think you're going to pop it into chat. So this is our homepage. You've actually only got the top half. Underneath the text is the map of the routes, links to social media, links to our blog, and I'll come back to the blog. Data from the CoLab, as I've mentioned, has been successfully transferred to the new platform, because that was giving me sleepless nights because it was just so much. It didn't even belong to us. It belonged legally to the community and was in the public domain, and it was just going to disappear. All the original routes are in the process of being checked, and we're also retrofitting the new points of interest, the geology, the ecology, the black to green, and so on. You will be able to view the routes on a PC, to download them to phone or iPad, and for this time, eventually, when Jamie's got his head around it, print out a PDF, which was one of the big issues on the old CoLab through feedback. Was we want hard copy, because our demographic, a lot do not have smartphones, so they can look at it on their phone, on their iPad, on their computer, but they couldn't download it or take it with them. So progress, we're doing kind of really well. You can kind of see we've got our 5 areas, so 5 Lanarkshire, Ayrshire, Midlothian and East Dunbartonshire, but we've also got communities coming forward out with the target locations, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. We're not saying no, although we are trying to focus on getting our kind of 15 routes done for meeting the lottery specifics. We have a new interface for the routes. This is kind of what it it looks like. It's sitting separately at the moment from the website, and it isn't accessible yet to the public, but you can have a sneak preview. And again, I'll leave the URL up on the final slide, but please remember that this is a beta version. And the aim is to bring them together and open the museum doors early August. And although the landscape journeys are, I suppose, key to the museum's collection, we have a blog to showcase the stories around the creation of the routes from the volunteers, so the community volunteers, as well as the students. The blog also enables communities to highlight individual features of their local mining heritage, such as a surviving building or a story, particularly where their landscape does not permit a viable walk. And we have a lovely example of this as the former mining community of Stonyburn and Bents. Now, they've already got an interpreted walk, and they'd raised money for a new memorial and had been particularly successful in engaging the younger generation, and they wanted to share their story. So they worked together with a student volunteer and created a blog and told their story. So although they have a walking route, they now also have Stonyburn and Bents firmly in the museum. We have a What's New page, and this aims to provide an accessible point for mining communities across Scotland to promote and share mining-focused heritage activities, both within and out with their immediate local areas. Again, under development is the feedback page. And feedback was a key feature of the Cole app, and it worked really, really well. So we kind of just simply transferred that over. But now it's directly linked to the end of each landscape journey. And it encourages users to suggest stories, additional points of interest, ideas for new journeys. But importantly, it allows the user to record landscape change in real time, because a lot of these sites are earmarked. They're classed as vacant and derelict lands. As we saw, there is a drive at the moment to clean up vacant and derelict land. So a lot are earmarked for development. And although the Ecomuseum is not trying to stop that, what we want to do is record that landscape change in real time so that we have a record of it. We've also introduced selfie spots that came out of our advisory board. They thought that might be another good way of encouraging users to engage directly with the team and, importantly, the museum. So that's our story so far. We're on track. Things are looking good. But obviously, time will tell in terms of impact and achieving our objectives, because kind of our doors are not yet open. So maybe I should come back in 6 months and say it's all failed or it's all been a brilliant success. So hopefully I've generated interest and raised some questions and points for discussion. So that's me.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for that, Catherine. And that's a really good insight into the beginnings of your project. Sounds really fascinating. I love all the different ways you're sort of trying to bring in different parts of what's quite a complex and a large area as well, with lots of different communities. But so yeah, if you want to come back in 6 months and tell us how it's all going, that'd be really interesting. But I'm going to hand over to Kat, who's going to sort of chair questions. But if so we'll open the floor to questions, and you can either raise your hand and say them, either just audibly, or you can put your camera on if you like as well, or you can put them into the chat if you don't want to say them out, and we'll aim to get round to them all.
How can I?
So